Guys, gals, and in fact non-binary pals, welcome back to Rhyme Signatures, where we are going to be tackling something a tiny bit different today. Yes, we're still talking about music, don't you worry your little heads about that, but I'm going to be talking about music which I've not really covered on the channel before. Something else that I'm a big fan of is video games. You know, shocker, I know. Who'd have thought that, a mid-30s man like myself into video games as well as everything else? Shockingly original of me, I know. But yes, I am a big fan. I've been playing games for most of my life. Back in the day, I can remember vaguely figuring out how to run things on MS-DOS. I'm feeling very accomplished about myself, which we will touch on later in the video in more detail. And I figured I wanted to talk about my 10 favourite video game soundtracks. Now, this is not going to be your typical list. There are going to be a considerable number of notable absences which you would generally expect to see on these types of lists. So I'm going to get a few spoilers out of the way straight away, and I'm going to tell you right off the bat, not a single Zelda game is on the list, not a single Mario game is on the list, no Final Fantasy, no Pokemon. There's quite a few absences, like I say, where you would normally expect these to feature. But ultimately, the reason for this is that I wanted to give you my list. I don't want to give you a conglomerate from a corporation. I wanted to give you my raw, honest, and unbiased opinion as to what I consider to be my personal favourite video game soundtracks of all time. So, with that slight bit of a disclaimer out of the way, let's get right into things with number 10. Right, so I don't know how many people watching this will have ever played the Heroes of Might and Magic series, but they were such a formative part of my youth. I played the heck out of these games, and mostly it was 2 and 3 that I played the most, and I nearly put 2 on this list because obviously I played that before I played 3. But ultimately, Heroes of Might and Magic 3 was one of my most played games of all time. It still is one of my most played games of all time, and the music is just iconic to me. It is so nostalgic, it fills a void in my life that just nothing else can really scratch. I love the way that every single hero class in the game, every town that you basically play as, has its own very distinct theme. It manages to be spooky in some places, like with the Necromancer heroes, or it manages to be heroic when it comes to like playing as the knight with the castle and everything like that. Everything fits properly as to the overall mood and atmosphere of everything in the game. The battle music is really catchy and infectious, and just the overall sound design of the game was brilliant. I have got so many of those little sound effects that's lodged into my brain. For a long time, I did have the gold pickup noise that, you know, when you grab like a piece of gold off the map. I had that as my text alert tone for quite a while. And honestly, just hearing any of the musical sounds from this game sets off an immediate nostalgia response with me. I love these games, I love the music, and I had to include it in my top 10. Right, number 9, a little bit more popular now, we're going with Diablo 2. Specifically Diablo 2 over any of the other entries in the series, because again, Diablo 2 is another one of those games I've obsessed over most of my life, and I've sunk countless hours into this series in general. Very tempting to pick up the new expansion pack for Diablo 4, but I'm going to wait a week or two to let the inevitable queues and issues that often crop up with these games sort of like just go away for a bit, and so I don't get too stressed about it. But for me, Diablo 2 musically is one of the most atmospheric games probably ever made. And you take one step forth into the wilderness of Act 1 and you will understand immediately where I'm coming from with this. It's dark, it's gothic, it's creepy, it's spooky. It's quite intimidating in places as well. The further you get into the depths of hell, the more sinister things become, and the overall sound design of the game is absolutely nothing short of exquisite. To this day, I feel it is completely unmatched in terms of its sinister atmosphere. It's one of the first games I remember actively going out of my way to use headphones on because I wanted to soak up the richness of the atmosphere, and to this day it remains one of the most engaging games sonically that I've ever experienced. Okay, number 8, Elder Scrolls 3 Morrowind. Now I know I said there was going to be some unpredictable, entries on this list. This is not one of the unpredictable ones. Y'all knew there'd be an Elder Scrolls game on here. It just wasn't going to be Skyrim, not for me. Whilst you've got the very dramatic and cinematic feel that Skyrim gave, I preferred the more, how shall we put it, low stakes almost of Morrowind. It's a much smaller experience. It's a much more granular thing. I love Morrowind's music simply because of how cozy it all feels. There's not any real sense of massive adventurism that you get with the soundtrack for Skyrim, where it's all boom, 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 very brash, big, and exciting. Morrowind was a lot more sedate. It was a lot more it was calmer, you know, it was a lot calmer than anything else that's really come out from the Elder Scrolls series, and I loved it for that. It feels like, you know, reading a book by the fireside almost. There's something intrinsically comforting about the soundtrack to Morrowind that nothing else has ever really been able to replicate for me. I will frequently listen to tracks from this just to chill myself out, to relax, to bring myself down after a stressful day, whatever. And it's honestly just wonderful to experience in and of itself outside of the game. Okay, number 7, Metal Gear Solid 2 Sons of Liberty. Yeah, this was one of the big reasons I bought a PS2 back in the day, because like most people who had a PlayStation, one of the big games for that was, of course, Metal Gear Solid, and when the sequel was announced for the PS2, everybody lost their collective minds. Now, I remember seeing that initial trailer with the music by Harry Gregson Williams, that main theme from Metal Gear Solid, you know, dun dun dun. Really, really great stuff. But it's more than just that. There is something so well-rounded about this soundtrack, so incredibly intoxicating about it. It had that cinematic flair and scope that you would come to expect from an elite Hollywood composer, but it also very much felt like a video game soundtrack. And it was the marriage of those two styles that made Metal Gear Solid 2's soundtrack so interesting and honestly so genre-pushing at the time. Nobody was really doing this kind of level of cinematic scope of experience that Metal Gear Solid was doing, and honestly, it's how well the music and the sound design worked in this game that made it such a memorable experience for me, and why I feel the game stands the test of time. Number 6, it's one of my favourite real-time strategy games of all time, it's Warcraft 2. Yeah, if we're going to talk about Blizzard, because they've appeared once on this list already, and just checking my list... No, this is the last time, so apologies to StarCraft and World of Warcraft fans. Yeah, Warcraft 2 absolutely set the bar for me for addictive, memorable, and catchy music. Nothing else out there is quite as memorable, quite as joyously entertaining as Warcraft 2's music. And of course the sound design is always part of the experience here, you know. I mean, who can forget playing the shareware version of this game back in the day, repeatedly clicking on the peons and what have you, for them to ask you nicely to buy the full game or they'll start singing at you. The music and sound in this game is so full of life and so full of personality, far beyond the technological limitations of the day. For me, it's really more about how well composed these songs are, rather than how they sound from a purely technical perspective. These tunes will get stuck in your head, they'll pump you up, you'll feel ready for action at a moment's notice the second you hear some of these songs start playing. It's brilliant, I love it so very, very much, and I'm delighted to have included it on my list. Okay, number 5, one of the very few video game soundtracks I've actually physically purchased. It's Kingdom Hearts. When I was a teenager, there was a very important decision I had to make with my hard-earned pocket money at the time. It was a choice between buying Kingdom Hearts on one hand, and Ratchet & Clank on the other hand. I simply couldn't decide, and obviously I only had enough funds realistically to ever be able to afford one of them, because I didn't get to buy many games as a teenager because I had to do it myself. Ultimately I went for Kingdom Hearts because bit of a Disney nut, always have been, and that's really what sealed the deal for me, and I'm so glad that I did, because I went through a slightly obsessive phase, shall we say, about the game, which lasted through 1 and 2, and then things started falling apart a bit when they started naming them weirdly and putting them on every single console under God's green earth. I didn't much care for Kingdom Hearts 3 either, I thought it was eh. But nothing will detract from how much I enjoyed playing Kingdom Hearts, listening to the music, and just experiencing everything that it brought into the world. I used to restart the game multiple times in a row, just so I could listen to Simple and Clean. Then everything of course changed when I got it on CD, as I spammed that for hours at a time, listening to nothing else for weeks. It was just such an obsession of mine. I still think it's one of the best composed games in the sort of greater Final Fantasy universe kind of thing. It'll always have a very special place in my heart, and I love this soundtrack until the end of time. Okay, number 4, one of the first handheld items on the list. It is Golden Sun and Golden Sun 2: The Lost Age. We're lumping them both together because I kind of feel like you kind of have to. However you spin it, Golden Sun is a series that I feel has somewhat unfairly been lost to time, because a lot of people that you speak to nowadays, they're like, Golden what? Which really upsets me, to be honest with you, because at the time these games were huge. Everybody was talking about these games. And what I loved most about Golden Sun was, simply put, it was the music. It was so incredibly good. I used to like going to my favourite locations in the game, setting down the console, plugging it into the wall so it didn't lose charge or anything like that, and I would just listen to the music on repeat because I enjoyed it that much. I'll never forget the first time the fight music kicked in as well. It absolutely blew my mind. So beautifully composed, so incredibly well delivered given the limitations of the technology, and it really did make for one of the best overall RPG soundtracks that I've probably ever listened to. I also vividly remember the first time I plugged my headphones into my Game Boy Advance. It was because of this game. Somebody said, "Have you ever tried listening to it with headphones on?" And for some reason, I don't know why, because I was young and stupid, I guess, I'd never really thought to, use the headphone jack that was on the console. But the first time I did that, and I heard the layers and the amount of extra depth that was behind the music that I just simply wasn't getting before, oh, life changed. Absolutely unbelievable moment for me. Incredible game, incredible soundtrack. Please do check them out. Okay, and it's into the top 3 with Doom. And we're talking about 1993 Doom here. We're not talking about 2016 Doom, although that is still valid. Doom really did set me on a path. I feel like if I had never played Doom, if I'd never experienced the soundtrack to the original Doom, I probably wouldn't have gotten into heavy metal, I probably wouldn't have gotten into everything else, and it all sort of snowballs from there. It all snowballs from the time that I, as a young 7-year-old lad, yes, I know, I was far too young to play the game, but no one cared at the time, I figured out how to install and run Doom on MS-DOS, all by myself, by the way. I'm just saying, very proud of myself, big moment for me. Kids today, they don't know how good they've got it, We used to have to do exe commands and all that sort of nonsense. But I figured it out. I figured out how to do shareware Doom, and I played the absolute bejesus out of it. And when E1M1 kicked in, I was, that was it. That was me for life. That was, okay, I need more of this. I need more of this kind of music, whatever this is, whatever this music is described as or considered or appreciated as, I needed more of it. I had to find more of it, which inevitably led me to things like Megadeth and Metallica and all that good stuff, So from Doom, we got everything else which I call my music tastes. But Doom isn't just about its incredible soundtrack. The sound design is absolutely exquisite on this. If I say Doom to you, you've probably already heard the sound of the shotgun in your head. You've probably already heard the sound of imps throwing fireballs at you, or the chainsaw whirring into life. It's so iconic, it's such an incredible experience from an auditory perspective, that to have this anywhere lower on the list would just be absolute madness for me. Okay, number 2, we've got Planescape Torment. This is one of my all-time favourite games ever. Now, this is not really from a gameplay perspective, because you can argue until you're blue in the face that this isn't actually a great game, it's just a really, really good book. And I wouldn't disagree with you. But with that great literary experience that comes from this game, also comes a great sonic experience from this game. I feel like there are a few games in this world that can set off goosebumps down my arms quite so much as the main theme to Planescape Torment kicking in. And then just that entire vibe, that entire feeling you get just from being in Sigil. Every piece of background music feels incredibly rich, layered, deep and atmospheric. Every single bit of music sets me off on a nostalgic trip. Every time I remember certain story beats being unfolded before me, I remember the music that accompanied them. And those revelations, the big plot revelations that came with that, I just associate with that music. It's absolutely exquisite. I remember I named my first ever D&D character after one of the side quests of this game. His name was Adan. Now, if anybody has played Planescape Torment, you'll know that you can lie about your name being Adan to certain NPCs throughout the game. And eventually, due to the nature of the belief system in the game, you can will into creation a person called Adan. And so obviously that was like my little bit in D&D. I love the game. I brought him into that. And it all comes down to how good and how well executed the sound design and music in this game was. It feels like nothing else. The atmospherics are second to none, but they are only superseded by one more release on this list. Number 1 is Legacy of Kain Soul Reaver. I cannot possibly express to you enough how incredibly excited I am about the fact that there is a remaster of this game coming out. Good lord! And the main reason why I'm excited for it is because I am sincerely hoping, praying with everything sort of pressed together and fingers and toes and everything crossed, that they will be doing remasters of the soundtrack to go with it, and maybe, hopefully, potentially a physical release on CD and or vinyl, pretty please, would love that very much. My obsession with this game and with this game's soundtrack is unlike almost anything else. Like, I swear to God, I cannot even begin to describe how important this game was to me musically. From the very first moments when I bought the game, installed it, I played it on PC, God help me, I actually had the PC port as my first exposure to this, which was probably not the best way to experience it. I didn't know any better, you know? That was just what I played. But that opening cinematic with Ozar Midrashim by Information Society playing out, I was hooked. I could not believe what I was listening to. This dark, gothic, synthwave atmospherics. Oh my goodness. I had never heard anything like it. It changed my life. It literally changed how I thought about music when this came out. I have never, to this day, yet experienced a video game soundtrack and sound design and voice acting which has hit as hard as Soul Reaver has done. Nothing has come close. Nothing has even remotely come close. This is one of the most important games that I've ever played in my entire life. Yes, the gameplay is brilliant. Yes, the story is fantastic. But ultimately, when it comes down to it, what I remember most from this game is the music. It's the sound of it all, how it worms into your psyche. It embraces you with this dark, creepy, incredibly threatening atmosphere at all times. It never lets up. It always manages to keep you just on the precipice of feeling uncomfortable, and I love how they managed to do that. Compositionally, the music in this game was so ahead of its time it almost hurt. It still sounds incredible even to this day, and I really do feel that if given the ultimatum to say, what is your favourite video game soundtrack of all time, it would have to go to Soul Reaver. So, there we go, there we have it. Those are my 10 favourite video game soundtracks of all time. Yeah, I know, there's a lot I've not included, there's a lot that's missing from this, and I understand that, you know. But ultimately, I couldn't include everything. I mean, obviously, there's the likes of Command & Conquer Red Alert, Beyond Good and Evil, Advance Wars, Shadow of the Colossus, World of Warcraft, Terminal Velocity. There's so many things I could have picked, so many different, incredible, amazing game soundtracks I could have included, but I can only obviously do 10 in a top 10. So I had to be quite strict with myself, I had to follow a very careful regimen as to what I was going to actually include, and I had to be real with myself. So that is my top 10, but I'd love to know about your top 10. Is there anything unexpected in your list? Maybe a long-forgotten gem that nobody else really remembers? Please tell me about it in the comments down below, I'd love to hear it. But if you did watch this far, guys, thank you so very much indeed for watching, and until next time, as always, keep your rhyme signatures pretty odd.